Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to this conference. My name is Liao. I serve as the chief economist at Circle, an advisor at Nexus Labs, and a research fellow at Cornell. Today I'm talking about enabling liquidity in LSTs and RWAs. Note that the views here are mine and not of those of the affiliated organizations. So I'll start from the big picture. Why is this topic important? I think it relates to a fundamental question about economic security of proof-of-stake chains. Because currently, economic security of proof-of-stake chains are limited by the amount of stake ETH there are, or staked tokens there are. And it is really defined as a ratio of how much on-chain value exists. That is both the native token as well as, in the case of Ethereum, ERC20 tokens and NFTs, relative to the amount of stake ETH. So on Ethereum, it's about 80 billion of stake ETH, which is about 25% of all ETH in circulation. But on top of that, this amount of stake ETH is securing about $500 billion worth of total value in the terms of ERC20 tokens and NFTs and broader ETH. So economic security here is actually, it's expressed as a ratio is about 6 to 1. And that's not really great if you think about how do we want to enable blockchain usage more broadly to support perhaps trillions of dollars of real-world assets that's in the world. You'd want to increase the amount of stake ETH or stake tokens to increase the level of economic security. So that means to make the number of the ratio of total value secured to stake value lower. Now, I think liquid staking tokens have increasingly become in a larger part of the narrative of how do you actually increase economic security. Liquid staking tokens allow staking to be much easier. So right now on Ethereum, about 50% of our stake ETH are in liquid staking tokens, which is tremendous. But that's still not that much. Overall, that's about less than 15% of our ETH in circulation. It's heavily concentrated, with Liao taking the lead. And of course, there's quite a bit of diversification in the long tail. But I would say this is far from the broader use case that liquid staking tokens could have. I think the limit is because there's somewhat of a lack of liquidity. Liquidity against the reference asset, in which case, in the case of stake ETH, the reference asset is ETH. Liquidity and fungibility is what brings utility to the stake tokens. And it is through this sort of utility that you could improve economic security. Right now, trading volume against for these LSTs, that's on-chain is about average $1 billion a day on AMMs, which is not a lot, and it's actually even smaller if thinking in terms of TVL on AMMs, which is sub 100 million. So to really improve the adoption of liquid staking tokens, one would need much greater amount of liquidity and much greater amount of TVL on-chain to support the usage of these liquid staking tokens. But liquidity has been poor. So this is actually the price of stake ETH versus ETH yesterday, which kind of depegged about 2%, which might not seem to be significant, but it is quite significant in terms of deterring the usage of liquid staking tokens for collaterals. As a result, I think this really truly limit the growth of LSTs and limits also the economic security of proof-of-stake chains. So for stake ETH, even though it could be used as a collateral for many of the projects out there, right now the adoption is fairly low. On Ethena, I believe it's about 8% or so is actually stake ETH, even though initially it was initially the idea was to have a much heavier portion of stake ETH as collateral. Now, why is this related to RWAs? I think RWAs that are yield-bearing tokens, such as short-term T-bill type of funds, face a very similar issue with LSTs. Both stake ETH and liquid staking tokens and RWA tokens have yield-bearing utilities. That's just from the stake yield. But both of them actually lack the underlying settlement utility. So the only way to obtain the settlement utility is through borrowing it through the actual more native token. So stake ETH is ETH, but for RWA tokens, it's actually stablecoin. So you need fungibility to borrow the settlement utility from the non-yield-bearing token into the yield-bearing token. So the talk, I usually don't make many memes, but today I make one. It's really that liquid staking tokens have so much similarities with RWAs in that they're both yield-bearing, they both struggle with liquidity, and they both need to maintain pegs, and they're also critical for the economic security of blockchain, but also broader adoption of blockchain for real-world usage. Now, how do we achieve fungibility or liquidity in the RWA space? You know, at Circle, we actually think quite a bit about this because you know, of the stablecoin being the primary source of liquidity. I would say largely there are three categories, and they all have the pros and cons with each. The first way to achieve fungibility is to incorporate the yield-bearing, have the yield-bearing token incorporate stablecoin as part of the reserve. So this is similar to the concept of, you know, SDAI, stake DAI, holding DAI as a reserve and DAI holding USDC as a reserve. So at the end of the day, you're borrowing the liquidity and the network effect of the underlying stablecoin, maybe USDC in this case, and extending it to DAI and SDAI. The second way is to create a separate liquidity pool of stablecoin that can be used for redemption, redemption of the tokenized fund. So that's what Buildo, the BlackRock fund, does. There's a separate pool of USDC that's available for the BlackRock fund to redeem into. And third way, I think it's the most interesting and more complex aspect is building robust secondary market on central exchanges as well as on decentralized exchanges. USDM, the Mountain Protocol, have curve pool that takes this concept, but many of the other tokenized RWA tokens right now do not have much secondary market liquidity, in part because of permissioning, but I think it's also in part because of the lack of features that's needed on AMMs today to support secondary market. Inherently, there's actually a trade-off between the most fungible option, which is to keep a fixed price reserve embedding. So that's the first option, and the second option I spoke of, or liquidity facility. And the most fungible option means that you can redeem the RWA tokens for stablecoin, or in the case of stake ETH, for ETH, at a fixed price at par, but you're limited to how much is actually in that liquidity pool, how much could actually be redeemed. And because price discovery doesn't happen, you cannot incentivize more liquidity to come in. On the opposite spectrum, you could have more resilient liquidity, that is through something like a universal price bounding curve, such as in QeD Protocol, with unlevered LPs, in which case the price could depeg however much you like. There will always be some residual liquidity, and the more that there is a depeg, the more that liquidity could be brought in through the pricing mechanism. But it's not great because you have a depeg. In the middle, you have kind of a balance between the two, which is some more fixed price through concentrated liquidity. So this is through like a Uniswap v3 type, perhaps also with levered LP vaults. So in the past, there were vaults such as the G-Uni vault that kept quite a bit of liquidity concentrated around parity. The problem is you could dislocate from parity, and sometimes it would actually cause deleveraging effects. So there's no right solution to this. It's really a choice of, do you want to maintain fixed value asset without price discovery and possibly some hidden risk, or some floating value asset with depeg risk. as a liquidity provider. Now, so what I said so far is basically summarizing that liquidities for pegged assets are quite poor. In the DeFi space, LSTs have poor liquidity on-chain, and that is preventing the growth of the staked ETH and preventing the growth of the overall economic security of proof-of-stake chains, and also preventing the usage of LSTs for collateral usage. On the RWA side, you have a very similar story, that now there's probably half a dozen or a dozen funds or so that are tokenized money market funds of sort, aggregate circulation probably over $1 billion, that have existed purely as a savings vehicle, but it's really hard to actually use it as collateral because there's lack of liquidity. So the broader adoption of blockchain for TradFi is quite limited because of this liquidity issue. Furthermore, I think there's something more fundamental unique to LSTs and yield-bearing tokens. The core issue is these sort of tokens have predictable price changes due to dividend and coupon payments that require either rebasing or accrual. So either you have a rebasing token in which there's a fixed price and variable quantities such as stake ETH and or rebasing OUSG, which is an Undo product, or you could have the accumulating version in which it's actually variable price. The price will keep on going up as coupons get accrued, but it's fixed quantity. So that's the wrapped stake ETH version and the more native OUSG for Undo. The problem is with AMMs is AMMs can't change price without arbitrage. That's just a fundamental fact of how automated market makers work on-chain. So this leads to quite a bit of MEV leakage that is predictable, but also preventable. In addition, rebasing tokens are incompatible right now with Uniswap, and LPs also had to consistently adjust positions for the more accumulating type of tokens. And lastly, there is a need for permissioning for some of these yield-bearing tokens. So overall, that leads to the problem of poor liquidity in LSTs and RWA yield tokens. So I'll go over perhaps a solution, but starting with some observations of where this motivation is coming from. The first part of the motivation is the predictability around rebasing. This chart shows arbitrage trade on the buy side and on the sell side for the wrapped stake ETH versus wrapped ETH pool in Uniswap v3. And every day you notice this effect of the arb trades tends to double around 12 p.m. UTC time daily. And this is because rebasing is around that time. So to change the price of the wrapped stake ETH, the automated market maker requires arbitrageurs to come in and essentially arb the pool so that you can get a higher accumulating price. Of course, this leads to some MEV leakage that I think is quite preventable. And on the pricing side, you see similarly around 12 p.m. UTC time, there's the return of wrapped stake ETH tends to jump. So I think one way to actually prevent this is to add on enough of a dynamic fee for the AMMs just at the right time that capture most of the expected price movements. So this is quite different than looking at what has happened in the market and adjusting fees, but rather embedding off-chain information about what is going to happen about coupon payment, dividend payments, and incorporating that into the price. Another problem is with LPs. LPs have to shift their liquidity when price deviate, either because of dividend or coupon payments, or doing depegging events. So this is a liquidity chart on Uniswap v3 for stake ETH and wrapped stake ETH. And what you observe is when price shift, you do have some LPs are often left behind. Yesterday was a day in which there was also quite a bit of dislocation, so there was very little liquidity when the price shift way out of the range. Now, zooming out, a broader challenge with AMMs more generally beyond LSTs and RWA tokens is that there are anticipated volatility events in the market that is not being priced in AMMs. So these are for instance, macro data releases, Fed announcements, or just differences in volatility due to trading hour. These are quite forecastable, yet these sort of information are not being embedded into AMMs currently. So one potential solution that a few colleagues and I we looked into is building a Uniswap V4 hook, we call it Unicast, that adjusts LP fees and positions by incorporating both forward-looking dynamic fee to shift the value capture from the ARBs into LPs, as well as adjusting the forward-looking price changes to rebalance LP positions. So we actually submitted this for one of the first hackathon on V4 hooks and got first prize for it. What Unicast does is it uses external oracles of information about RWAs or LST rebasing, as well as macro events, to account for predictable volatility. These are volatility events read from, implied from options market, both on-chain and off-chain, as well as just known knowledge about when rebasing would happen or when coupon payments will happen. And it accounts for also predictable price changes because it's embedding these sort of information and adjusts the dynamic fee accordingly for the different trading hours and macro event announcements. So the value proposition for different stakeholders are significant. For the LPs, it really reduced the divergence loss through forward-looking rebalancing and dynamic fee. For the swappers, it's about accessing the best liquidity with increased LP participation. And for the issuers, it provides a way to actually incentivize deeper liquidity through an auto rebalancing type of structure. And the overarching goal is grander. It's about growing LST to strengthen the economic security of proof-of-stake chains and growing the adoption of RWAs for broader use of blockchain in TradFi. So today I presented a framework of thinking about LSTs and RWAs and how they are similar in that they are yield-bearing, they have coupon payments, and there are predictable price changes, and some of the problems that exist currently with poor liquidity leading to lack of adoption. I also proposed one potential solution that's more market-based, that is about embedding prior knowledge about events that are known in the future to help grow the liquidity of LSTs and RWAs. Thank you so much.